easy to miss that because we're so angry about some of the things we heard before. So bombing with love is what I think he's trying to do. Whether he succeeds or not is another question. But I
I
just wanted to
want
say that.
I want to get back to that, but Lewis, hi, you've been patient. So do you have a question or comment for the panel?
Yeah. So I'm not exactly in advance. Excuse my voice. I'm having allergies right now, so it's acting up. But I'm taking a more individualistic stance because I am way younger. All of you are adults, so I can't really speak on certain factors. But a comment I would say,
Do you mind disclosing your age?
yeah, I'm 18.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where I'm in right now, Dave Chappelle is such a cultural force that people of all ages love him. I know people who are well making the way to their 90s and they love him, and I know people who are way younger than me and they love him. And where I am at right now, there are certain topics that Chappelle addresses that you cannot touch, whether it be from a serious heterodox point of view or a humorous point of view. And I'm not a big fan of the whole, specifically in school, I'm not a big fan of the whole, oh, your kid's a communist kind of argument. But these are still very sensitive hot button topics that you cannot touch. So, considering my generation, where our generation, at least in the social media landscape, is known for this sort of absurdist humor, when there's someone like Chappelle who sort of offers us this paradox where he offers us the same humor we sort of encourage amongst ourselves, but in a very um in a very in your face way that may get in the face of certain people and it may make them uncomfortable. Yet he has that glimmer, he has that charisma that makes you think about it, and it offers, especially my generation who has this sort of gnostic, I don't know if y'all know that word, this sort of gnosticism of like, we have this, due to technology, we have this perceived view on all the evils of this world, so we must speak on it. But when Chappelle gets in our faces and tears down every factor of all of what we think, we don't know how to respond. It's a very healthy paradox. So I think that whether it be Chappelle's technique, whether it be his, or maybe his shortcomings, I think we can all agree that he's a healthy force. And sort of to um, when I remember I was sort of, I don't know if you ever heard of him, but his name is Michael Malice. He's sort of this internet troll, and he's also this political figure. And he was talking about Trump and his sort of his cult following, and he was talking about how we need to realize that Trump is not the river, he's the dam. That he's sort of we should be not focused on Trump himself, but the people who follow him. His dangerousness is not him, but the people who follow him. So when I look at someone like Chappelle, who tears down everyone, no matter who, he in a way is sort of holding back the dam, because when we start being scared to talk about anything, there is a lot of repression that comes into that. So when Chappelle goes in, he is sort of making his way around the dam. He's not acting as, sorry, around the river. He's not being a dam. He's not holding it back. But at the same time, he's getting in our faces. I keep saying that a lot. But as I don't know if it's Angel or Angel. Your last name is kind of Hispanic, but he Angel made the point that when he had to stop, he stopped when they weren't laughing for the same reason. So it's also that Chappelle, he has his standards, but um, when we understand that he's a comedian, we need to understand, at least in my point of view, that he doesn't give a damn about our standards. It's only when it affects, I would say, very rightfully, when it affects him as an artist and his morals, that's where he needs to be like, okay, I'm out or I'm in. So that's my point of view.
Thank you for that. That was awesome. And you're 18? You're very
Yeah,
insightful.
yeah,
Very.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. He brings up a good point, and there's a question I want to ask you guys, and it's very broad. But what's the point? Besides laughing, what's the point of comedy? Anyone? Because I think this is the point.
I think there's a lot of points.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I
Go
think there's a
ahead,
lot of
Jack.
points. I think like Dr. Lunsford and Angel are pointing to one, which is that it builds community and reinforces connections, and that we are happy as and like it creates comedy, and it promotes truth. Like the point that a lot of people are pointing to here is that like comedians are truth tellers, and they push the bounds for the sake of us seeing sort of what is beyond those bounds. And I need to push back a little bit, I feel like, on what feels like that when people make what I think are sort of discrete claims about criticisms about this particular special, or the way that he made certain jokes here, and why we think that they didn't illuminate, that they obscured rather than illuminating in this kind of way, the response I feel like I often get is, well, you just didn't get it, or you don't like transgressive comedy, or it wasn't for you, or something like that. And maybe that's the case, but I also think that that's not necessarily a response to specific claims. So, for like example, Dr. Lunsford's reference to the gay people are a minority until they need to be white again. There's probably a meaningful conversation there, but I also think there's a meaningful conversation that for Chappelle, gay people are a minority until he needs them to be white for his punchline. And like that causes problems. And I think we can have that conversation alongside the intersectional conversation about whiteness and gayness and blackness, and what these how these different communities have different experiences with law enforcement and such like that. I think it's valuable to bring these kinds of criticisms, and it shouldn't be seen as not understanding what Chappelle was doing. I think we all understood what Chappelle was doing. Some of us just think that he was not making the best arguments and not doing the right thing to some extent.
I think that you make a great point, Aaron. For me, I don't think, well, one reason why I actually want to have this conversation is because of how polarizing this specific special was, and that I said on Twitter, and I said on, I don't know, another thing, Instagram maybe, and to my friends that are in the trans community, I told them, to me, I would feel ignorant if I didn't take in consideration of the criticism. If I just said, I don't care, like it didn't bother me, or, oh, he's not transphobic, you don't get him. The fact that enough people are outraged, I'm like, okay, there's something here and I need to listen. This is why I did call my friends before I did this special, or this episode that's in the trans community, because they're saying a lot of things that Aaron has expressed. They said that, particularly when Dave Chappelle walked away from $50 million, my friend said he had that insight to know, or when he heard an earshot of that executive and that producer laughing in a way that he didn't intend, that producer was laughing at Black people, or so to speak, and not at the joke. Why can't he bring that logic or insight in with maybe the trans community and saying, okay, it's not landing in the way that he means it. If he does mean, I'm getting at the line and I'm not going after you, I'm trying to humanize you in a sense, or I'm trying to show that you're equal, you're just like everyone else, because I do go after everybody. But if it's not landing, she's like, is that his responsibility? Like, should a comedian have some responsibility about a joke if it doesn't land the way he intends it to land, or does he let it go and we deal with it? Like,
I feel like that's part of a cultural thing that's happening with regard to the idea of cancellation, in the sense of like, you become responsible not only for in this individual instance, like Dave is usually trying to take down the white overlord, right? But that means that in the context of doing that, if you are not doing that the way that I wish you were doing that, then your language is offensive, even though it's technically the same language. That language is now offensive to me, and I think that's the I don't know. I don't have an answer. I was just bringing that as a thing that I find even just, as you said, processing this of a very large cultural challenge of what are we to be held responsible for, in the sense of like, I feel like they want to destroy the physical embodiment. Or sorry, I feel like some people want to destroy the physical embodiment of the white overlord, and some people want to destroy the entire fabric of the white overlord. And if that's the case, then this style of comedy falls in the fabric of that. And Dave being able to walk away from $50 million and then still come back and get his is an embodiment of the privilege that he receives, you know, as a man, right? That those arguments can be made that he is a part of colonialism now. Now, whether or not I believe that is not, I don't necessarily believe that, but I feel as if part of that anti-colonialism mentality that comes behind cancel culture is in there as well, in terms of that, who takes responsibility when the intent and the impact don't line up.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly about that, so me personally, I'm very much against like placing responsibility on people who are sharing ideas that produce results within people that they didn't intend at all. You know, I think that you can only really be held responsible for just how properly you try to communicate that message, right? But I don't think necessarily, for example, that if a trans person, you know, watches Dave's special and then they commit suicide or something like that, I don't think that Dave should be held responsible for something like that, you know? But I mean, with that said, I do think that there are better things that could have been done with the special. And I think that this may be indicative of just like a culture shift that's happening in a similar way, not completely analogous, but in a similar way to the fact that, you know, probably 100 years ago or whatever, comics used to do stand up in blackface, you know what I mean? And at a certain point that became anathema. You know, if somebody came up today and tried to do something like that, we would all, you know, rightfully criticize that person, right? And I'm just wondering if maybe there's some sort of culture shift happening now, you know, where we're all just sort of recognizing that there are some, well, not all, I mean, there obviously there's people that disagree, but where a lot of the country, a large portion of the country is recognizing that there are things that they're not willing to tolerate, right? And I think that may only be for the better, but I'll stop there.
I would say for me, to answer the question, I think comedy can do a lot of things. It can harm, educate. But for me, my interest in comedy is its ability to shift narrative, and in doing so, redistribute power or shift power narratives. So you think about a monarchy or like a court, where you would have like a court jester. So like the proximity to power. So like the ability, who has the microphone, who's being listened to, who is like impacting the national tone and conversation. Two quick points I would just add is I think it was mentioned earlier by you, Aaron, about him only speaking about Daphne, you know, kind of using her as a trope, like kind of how this is my gay friend, and it's really bad to talk about her now that she is deceased and not able to speak about herself. But I think Angel mentioned, like, he's been mentioning her in his stand-ups, and I think it was very genuine that even though after she passed, he didn't stop mentioning her, but then further talked about her story and the way that online bullying can play a part in, which is all of this, right? This feeling that we can get on the internet and massively get people to change their actions by showing our disdain and our disgust, how that, like, you know, contributed to, or could have had any possible contributions to her demise. And then lastly, I also love how people like get mad when they want to get mad and not mad when they don't want to get mad. And also just, again, the parallel, because I think it was said earlier too, Aaron, when you're like, if I were to get up on stage and say like the N-word a whole bunch of times, that to me was just triggering to even hear. And I think it's because like you can't just reverse things like that. Like, well, what if a white person does it? It kind of takes away the power and the mystique of the argument that he's trying to project. And the last thing, you mentioned the car joke. So in the last stand-up with the car joke, people never talk about how he was actually standing up for trans people within the LGBTQ community. So he mentions how the trans person T is in the back of the car and they're making the ride so much longer and so much harder for G and L, which is like lesbian and gay people, and how like the trans person is actually, they're in the car, but like no one really wants them there, which is a very valid critique on the way from trans people on the way that trans people are treated within the LGBTQ community. So for someone that just hates and completely does not see the humanity of trans people, to be able to articulate that argument and put that forward, you know, so it's like, I think that to me, like you said, Brittany, like, why would there be so much backlash? Like, I would be ignorant to not want to look into. And so when I started listening and asking my friends in the community, why are you upset? Some of them never watched the whole special. They only listened to clips. They never actually watched it. And so I think, of course, you're upset because anytime someone speaks truth to power about white supremacy and blatantly says, like, F whitey, and by whitey, I mean whiteness and the whole structure, there's always going to be, heads will always roll. So, like, I was not surprised by that at all. Yeah, but I just want to say people pick and choose. So it's like he's the celebrity we want until he's not telling like mushroom jokes and in the middle of like an opioid epidemic, right? Like, and if he's not telling the kind of jokes that we like, then he's like, you know, an enemy again. So I would just say that.
Okay. Well, someone was on, but they left.
Can I respond since she's sort of?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Aaron. Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess I want to try to make a connection here because, I mean, Dr. Lunsford, I am currently getting a PhD in moral education where I am focusing on things like post-colonialism. I'm very interested in all the things you were saying. And I was fully with you on what you were saying about how, you know, he was being pro-trans in that particular joke about the car. And to me, that just to emphasizes that he knows what he can do and he knows what he's saying. And that like when he falls down on other things, then we should point out that like he missed the mark on that one. Like we all here agree, I think, that comedy can be harmful or it can be helpful, right? And that context matters, as you just pointed out, that like me being a white person makes it different, just like Dave Chappelle being a very rich person makes it different, what he says and how he says it. And so I think, you know, my feeling is I want to have that conversation, but whenever I try to raise, here what I see are the criticisms, instead of addressing those criticisms, the response is, you were oversensitive because he's attacking your thing now, or you don't understand because you don't come from a culture that makes fun of each other, despite like, you know, coming from space Jew culture, which makes fun of itself all the time for the exact same reasons, right? Surviving being murdered by Cossacks. So like, I'm sympathetic to like 99% of what you're saying. And I just I don't understand why it has to then short circuit the valuable conversation we could have about how there are maybe some specific ways in which this particular special didn't do well on the goal that he was aiming for.
I guess for me, it would be the goalpost kind of like what you consider doing well and what you consider his rates of success are. And then also, I don't think you can conflate, like, when you say the exact same struggles, I think that gets into the oppression of Olympics of like comparing Black struggles with Jewish struggles, which is not something I would want to do. And I think when I mentioned
I was joking. I was literally like making a joke about like how lots of minority groups engage in comedy as a way to cope with being minorities.
And I think that, so my point was, I think that that's diluting the very specific point that I'm making, that Black culture specifically has a history with dozens in the dozen culture and how that's evolved from Black trauma and Black joy. And so to just say like, well, all cultures do it is not what I'm hinting at, is what I was saying there. And so and the other point about his wealth, you mentioned that, and a lot of people keep bringing, well, he walked away from $50 million. It's like, well, Negro, you're lucky they ever saw you. You're lucky they ever let you see a check that big. That's all I hear when people bring up Dave Chappelle's wealth, which is why he brings it up all the time. Like in the last special where he talked about, I should be a Trump supporter. I'm the one he cares about. I'm rich. I'm wealthy. So people love talking about Dave Chappelle's $50 million check, but they never tell you how much Seinfeld made per episode. Right. And so I think that even gets within the inequity, like with just even within comics. So it's like, it's Dave Chappelle is a rich man, not a Black man, when it's more fitting for our argument. But unless he can unless a cop pulls him over and they know that, you know, so I think we get back into those things about the punching up and punching down. We want to say he's up because he's rich, but what he's making is a very clear argument about Blackness, which can be extracted from that conversation about wealth. So to say like, well, I'm white, but he's rich, I think is really what he's like, kind of some of the arguments that he's trying to make is that people love to pit this against this and this against that.
Yeah, and all I'm saying is I think he makes good points about intersectionality, but that it's intersectionality for he, but not for thee, that he's not willing to see the intersectionality in the LGBT community the way you're asking us to see the intersectionality of his identity. And I fully agree. The fact that he is a Black person matters, and it's not just that his wealth matters. But if you're going to say, you know, it matters whether I'm a white person doing comedy, then I think it's also true to talk about class, and it's also true to talk about other, you know, male privilege, as Kyle I think brought up earlier, that like these are all should all be conversations that are on the table, and they like none of them should be shut down as, you know, you're trying to go on
And I think he mentioned
hunt.
all of those in his special, right? So he mentions the fact that he's a man, he mentions his class differences. I think all of that was like really brought out in the special.
I think it's really interesting that what's been going on the last few minutes is kind of, you know, what Dave said about gay people are a minority until they need to be white. And then what Aaron said about how, yes, gay people are a minority until Dave needs them to be white for the punchline. And then Dave is black when he is speaking truth to the power that we consider the power needs to be spoken truth to. And then when he switches his target, he is now a rich, privileged man. And the black thing kind of goes by the wayside for a second. And it just kind of, there's all this shifting going on. And I think, you know, it makes sense.
I think this is an unfair conflation. I think that
well,
like, these are two distinct sorts of things. I think all I was saying is if we're going to be
I wasn't
let's
trying
be
to
intersectional about everybody, right?
Yeah,
Not just some people, right?
No,
and
I
that's not
agree.
the same as saying, you know, Chappelle can't say these things because he's rich. Chappelle can absolutely make jokes about whatever community he wants, despite what kind of wealth he has. But, you know, what my point was that we should have conversations that are more complex than just the people who are disagreeing with him are disagreeing with him because they are anti-black or something like that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That I wasn't getting, that's not where I was headed with that. But you know, to answer Brittany's question.
To what you said really quick, Angel, about that conflation. Yeah. So Dave said that gay people are gay until they need to be white again. It was said in here that people are gay until Dave needs them to not be black, which I think that's not fully like a flesh. That is problematic, I think, in there. And then to say that Dave is black until he's wealthy. The thing that I would say in all of these situations is Dave is never not black. So his blackness is never removed from him on the table, whether he's wealthy and black or not. He's always black.
Yeah. I mean, I see what you're saying, but what I was getting at was that it's serving a similar function. What identity category we're emphasizing at any given moment depends on what point we're trying to make. Just like the identity category that he emphasizes depends on what joke he's trying to make. And that was just really, you know, an observation of I find it interesting that everyone is doing this in the conversation, and it was prompted kind of by the fact that he did it in the special. But I was leading to the point of just getting to, you know, to answer Brittany's question. In my opinion, what is comedy for? It is to make people laugh. That is the number one thing. And I think that if that's not a comedian's number one priority, if it's second or third to anything, then that comedian is not going to be funny to anyone except people who agree with that first or second thing, right? And I just think that the first thing is it should be funny, or at least attempting to be funny, right? It's not going to always work, but that is the goal. It's to be outrageous, it's to be crazy and absurd, because that's where funny is generally. Exaggeration is where funny is. Now, my favorite comedian of all time is George Carlin. And the reason is because he made me think. I loved his mind. I loved his wit, right? But if he weren't also funny, if he weren't funny first, if I didn't find him funny to begin with, I wouldn't even call him a comedian. So that's just where I'm coming from. And I think that another thing that needs to be taken into account is I think most comedians have my point of view, at least, you know, from what I can see, right? Someone like Dave is like, listen, I'm going up there and I'm trying to make people laugh. I'm trying to be funny. That's the number one goal. You know, I love listening to podcasts where comedians talk shop and they're talking about the craft, and it's always about the laugh. That's the thing they're chasing, right? Everything is second to that. And the other things could be important, but it's second to that. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think another thing that gets lost that makes these conversations more difficult is that, yeah, gay people are going to be a minority until he needs them to be something else for his punchline. because the punchline is what he's chasing. And he's going to make something up, and he's going to fudge, and he's going to be totally wrong about a point he's making if the point he makes it funny. And that's kind of getting back to the thing I said at the very, very beginning, where it's like, I'm laughing even when I disagree with him. And the reason is because I think I'm at least trying to also see the craft going on at the same time. And I'm appreciating that part of it. So, the statements that he's making, I appreciate them. I want to hear them. I love his mind. I think he's a brilliant guy. But it's secondary to me. And I think a lot of this is the result of many things, but one of them is a discrepancy in what we believe the point should be. And when we say like, that wasn't helpful, or that didn't do its job, we might be talking about different jobs, right? So my job was that funny first? And then was it interesting? And then was it, super layered and clever? So that's another thing to just throw out.
Yeah, I want to get back to that, Angel, because you're bringing up a good point. But press play. Can you hear me?